So welcome everybody. What a great opportunity to have Kimberly Williams with us. I think this is really a powerful presentation. Hopefully you had a chance to fill out the survey. She's going to talk about the assessment as we go through this evening. Let me quickly introduce her. You read her bio in the publicity, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you know that Kimberly is the president of the Center for Strategy Realization, and she's an executive leadership consultant and coach working with multinational Fortune 100 companies. She focuses on how to successfully deliver on their revenue growth, customer, and shareholder commitments during major transformation. So I have a feeling that will be very much of interest to all of you. And just to note that previously she served in Merck and Company's strategy office as the global head of change execution. And she was also executive director for the Global Services and Information Technology Business Unit. So she's got tons of experience in change management and strategy realization. So we're delighted to have you, Kimberly. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome, Abby. Hello to everyone on the line this evening. I took a little bit of time just to check in on some of your LinkedIn profiles, and it really is just such a privilege to be in the company of really an accomplished group of professionals. So thank you so much for having me. And with that, why don't we get started? So really three objectives for the time we're going to spend together this evening. First, to dive into a fact base that I created around the business case for strategic engagement skills. And honestly, I really put this together a couple of years ago. As I was starting my business, to understand what are the needs in the marketplace, where are the gaps, where are the pain points for businesses. And I never really had the time to build a fact base like this when I was at Merck. And now it's something that I use every day with senior leaders, and that I share with colleagues like you to really, again, set the context and the business rationale for why we need to build these change leadership skills in organizations. So we'll dive into that. The second thing that we're going to do is to interpret your personal change leadership effectiveness scores, your professional net worth scores, and your organization's change leadership maturity scores. This is a very diverse audience, and so we have really a broad cross-section of scores to think about. So what I've tried to do is roll those up for us to interpret so that you can get a sense of where are you relative to your peers, where are some of your strengths, and where are some areas that you might want to focus on going forward. And then finally, to surface, what is the most value-added role that you can play as an organization development or coaching professional in helping your leaders drive realization of business results in their companies? And what does that look like? What are some actions that you can consider, and some resources that you can use? There is in your handouts box one handout in there that looks like the graphic in the bottom center of your screen. This is for folks who, if you didn't have a chance to take the assessment that is available online, it asks a broader set of questions than we're going to cover this evening. But if you didn't have a chance to take that, I wanted to at least give you something to be able to sort of get a sense of where you're at as we're talking about this along the way. And so I'm going to pose a series of 7 questions, one around each of these skills, and give you a chance to just sort of quick paper and pencil kind of rate yourself and get a sense of where you're at. The other thing that I want to mention here is that this is a very fact-dense presentation. There's a lot of facts and data in here put together in sort of creative story forms for you to take away and use with your leaders. But I don't want you to feel as if you need to be writing down furiously all of the bits and pieces of information. All of the data that you see in here is in the white paper, and I'm going to email that to you after the presentation so that you have these for handy reference. Okay. So Let's do a deep dive into the fact base and the business context for why realization is important and what role strategic engagement skills play in those. And I think the best analogy that I could share with you is this one. So the two fish are talking to one another, and one says to the other, "Real swift move buying that dehumidifier." And that really is what we're talking about when it comes to what's happening with the results on our major strategic initiatives. They're underperforming. The water level is coming down. And in fact, a lot of folks don't understand why that is, but the answer is really hidden in plain sight. Right? We're inadvertently doing things that are causing the results on our initiatives to not attain the levels that we want. And because we're not aware of it, there isn't anything we can do about it. So in a couple cases, I've mentioned the word realization. So just really quickly to level set with everyone, when I'm talking about the realization of benefits, I'm talking about ultimately attaining the expected value of a solution that you're implementing over the course of time. It could be revenue, it could be cost reduction, it could be customer retention, it could be productivity increase. For those of you who are working in not-for-profits, it could be the uptake of the solutions that you're putting out there to your stakeholders. But this is the ultimate outcome that you're trying to achieve. Oftentimes folks in organizations, just because we all have our heads down, digging the ditch forward, we're really far too focused on activities and what we're implementing. So we're putting a solution into place, like we're streamlining processes, or we're going live with some new technology, or we finally got the restructuring of an organizational business unit done. And we've done all the activities, but we never ever take stock of whether we actually realize the results that we actually set out to get. And that really is a value loss. And it's not just what we didn't attain. It's what we didn't attain plus the cost of anything or additional losses that we incurred as a result of not achieving those ultimate outcomes. So if we had to spend money implementing new technology and we never got the productivity savings, not only did we miss the cost of miss the ultimate outcomes, but we incurred a cost around the implementation of that technology. So it's sort of a double whammy, if you will. And the challenge is we're leaving a lot on the table when it comes to lost value. So for instance, companies on average say they're only delivering about 63% of the financial performance that their strategic initiatives promise, with executives estimating that it's even less than that. It's around perhaps 50%. And there's a great study by Marcon and Bain in the Harvard Business Review some years back that estimates that if we could actually realize the benefits, the true benefits of our strategic initiatives, we could achieve somewhere between 60% and 100% more of the value of those initiatives. And so these are not insignificant numbers to executives in organizations if they could get that much more mileage out of their strategic initiatives. Unfortunately, most organizations don't track benefits realization. Around 60% don't have a process in place. Another 30% say they end in an ad hoc manner, and then others say, well, we only track them until we report on them, but we never really do a look back to actually determine, hey, if we said we were going to save $10 million, did we actually do it, or somehow did we miss the target or the scale changed? Examples of this realization issue cut across geography, and I won't go through all of these in detail, but suffice to say that whether you measure it in euros or rupees or US dollars or any other currency, the losses of value are in the billions of dollars, and these are tangible dollars, right? So these aren't soft costs and productivity. These are actually dollars wasted. And if you think about what does this look like across companies around the world? It's a challenging thing to measure, obviously, because there are so many different kinds of companies. But one of the things I try to do was just to estimate for publicly traded companies in equity markets around the world. If you look at all of the major companies in the publicly traded markets, you can easily get to like $300 billion value lost on an annual basis. And if you add in smaller markets, governments, private companies, universities, not-for-profits, worldwide realization loss exceeds $1 trillion. And I just saw a study recently that this was done a couple of years ago. I saw a recent study that said it eclipses $4 trillion, which perhaps in the big scope of global economics may not initially seem like that much, but if you're a leader that has a couple of $1 million loss at the business unit level, or if you're not attaining your goals at a company level, a couple of $1 million or even a couple of $100,000 here or there that's lost is a significant impact at the company level. And I think even more importantly, the cost is human too. I think we have all known people who have lost jobs or been transferred out of jobs because implementation, something didn't go well inside of their company. Our customers and clients know when realization isn't happening. Companies said that project failures directly impacted their customer, particularly their reputation with the customer. We know that it impacts things like safety, and after 20 to 30 years of working on behavior-based safety, many organizations have woken up to the fact that it never really worked. It looked great on paper, but it didn't actually change the behaviors and save lives. And similarly, in terms of life and health, project failure rates on humanitarian initiatives were only about 50% in Africa until the year 2000. They're a little bit better now. They're up around the 65% where some other initiatives are. But these have real impact on, not just companies' bottom lines, but people as well. So it's not as if we don't know this, right? I think we've all personally experienced underperformance of major initiatives in companies that we're working with. And lots of companies had made very significant investments in a whole variety of management methodologies since the 80s. And so maybe you'll recognize some of these with your clients, things like project management, strategy management, change management, agile, risk management, performance management, and so forth and so on. And the good news is they do provide value. It's better to have them than not have them. Strategy management, 80% are reporting improvements in their operating performance when they have a strategy office. Projects are much more successful when we apply even basic levels of change management. And similarly with project management, projects reach higher levels of benefits when there's some basic project management discipline in place. But here's the disconnect. Where these things are applied well, the project success rates have still remained flat at around 64%, which I think is a really interesting validation of that earlier statistic of 63% that we saw from a very different source earlier in the presentation. But project success rates are staying flat over the last 5 years or so. And so taking a quick pause here, a question for you is, what are you seeing in the client organizations that you're working with? And I'm using the term clients here very loosely. I recognize some of you are internal, some of you are external, some of you are operating in a not-for-profit environment where you really have stakeholders as opposed to clients. But if you think about some of the client groups and organizations you've worked with in the last couple of years and the big initiatives that they've undertaken, I'd like you to take an estimate of to what extent they have realized those benefits. So here's a poll for you. Are your clients realizing maybe 50 to 60% or less of what they set out to do, particularly on the financial side? 65 to 80%, 80% or above, or not really sure? Take a quick second and think through that and go ahead and record your answers, and we'll check in with you in just a moment. Oh, let's see, make sure not sure you can see it. Make sure, there we go. Hopefully you should be able to see it now. Okay, I see answers rolling in. All right, so it looks like we've got more than 90% of folks voting at this point. So let me close it.
Kimberly, there's a few questions here.
Okay.
About I don't know, Amy, if you figured it out, how to record the answer. Oh, you opened the poll. And then someone is asking, is there a way to make the graphic larger?
Sorry, which graphic are we talking about?
I don't know. Margaret, can you say which graphic you're referring to?
I'll check in on the questions as well. Margaret, are you referring to the graphic that's in the handout? All right. Well, we'll give Margaret a second to.
It was the
It was the
beginning graphic.
beginning
Okay.
graphic. Okay. So, Margaret, let's go back in a second, and I can revisit that. So, thoughts on how, while client groups are realizing financial or other important benefits of initiatives, most people saying not really sure. A couple of handfuls of people saying 65 to 80%, which, by the way, is really good. If you're working with a client group that's getting close to 80% realization, that's outstanding. The goal isn't necessarily get to 100% realization. No one would ever take risks. We would all be so cautious. It would take forever to get initiatives done. And so, there is a margin of error, I think, that's acceptable. But when we're operating in the neighborhood of 50 to 64%, obviously, we're leaving a lot of dollars and results on the table. And for the folks that said not really sure, it's a very common response. People in organizations say that as well. What it says to me, though, is that there's an opportunity here for us. If we don't know how well our clients are doing around realization, the better we understand that, the better that we can contribute to the achievement of significant, measurable financial business goals, which tends to be, as consultants, it tends to be our benefit, obviously, to be able to contribute to those kinds of results. So we'll talk a little bit later about our role in that, but it's quite common. What I see here seems to reflect what the body of literature is telling us as well. So let me do this. Let me get out of this poll. And Margaret, I'm not sure the initial graphic, which one you were referring to, making it larger. Give me a little bit more specifics if you can. And if there's a way that I can call it out and send it to you later, I'll be glad to do that.
There's a question here from Tess. Tess, do you still, sure, her hand is up. If you have a question, can you type it in the box there?
All right, so while we're waiting for those to come in, there's a little bit of delay on the chat.
It says the graphic you put on the first slide, yet you said was in our assessments.
I think that the graphic may have been, Margaret, I think that this may be the one that you are referring to. The graphic that you're seeing here is showing the white paper that I'm going to send you afterwards. However, the graphic to record the scores is in the handouts, and it is large. It's 8.5 by 11 sides. So if you want to get this graphic, you can grab that. You can grab that here in the handouts.
I think she's looking for a different one, but I just think we should. It will be in the white paper that she sends out, so I think we should just go past that.
And if it's the circular one, Margaret, it's in the handouts area, and you can download that now. All right, so let's keep going. Thank you for the question, Margaret. So we've got these methodologies in various stages of maturity. However, they're only getting us to 50 to 60% realization. And so what I really did in forming this business was to do a meta-analysis of about 30 credible sources, and on things like initiative failure, initiative underperformance, strategic challenges, things like that, and collected a couple of hundred articles and other types of research, which really revealed 7 key factors to realize.
Excuse me, Kimberly, I'm sorry. They're still seeing the results of the poll. Is that what they should be seeing?
No, they should be seeing. Let's see, they should be seeing the slide that I am. Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So, did a study with a number of sources, tons of articles trying to understand from sources like Bain, Deloitte, The Economist, Gartner, and many others. So why are we not getting past this threshold of 60% or so? And here's what we found. We found that there are about 7 factors: lack of clearly defined outcomes, low senior management commitment, leaders don't share a consistent view or prioritize or make trade-off decisions, inadequate communication or information flow, middle managers lacking the capacity or are not engaged in the change, lack of adoption or motivation on the part of employees to actually make the behavior change necessary to realize the results, and not always having performance linkages in place. And if you look at the theme that really cuts across all of these, it's the quality of leader engagement during strategy implementation that is the differentiating element that really makes the difference between getting 50 to 60% or being able to get to 80% and perhaps even more. And so the question was then, well, how can we package and share these with people so that we can start to deepen these skills in organizations? And, our theory around this is that change leadership is actually a niche skill set that companies aren't developing for. So, for instance, most organizations have management development programs where they learn things like how to run the business, routine goal setting, financial accounting for non-financial managers, basic business acumen, managing headcounts, how to do really basic people management type things like tactical operational reviews, and that they spend a lot of time and resources developing individual contributors into managers. At the next level of leadership development is really, having a smaller number of leaders with a broader span of control, but that means that they need to manage differently. It's not just people management anymore. It's managing future direction, guiding the organization to its future state, being able to articulate vision, mission, purpose, moving people towards a known end state. And our assertion is that within that is this niche skill set, these 7 individual skills that really have to do with taking people towards an emerging future state, one where you may not even know what the end state exactly looks like, and that these skills really are dialed up during times of large-scale change in the organization. They may not necessarily be things that leaders use on a day-to-day basis, but are specifically important during times of change. And if you look at where chief learning officers are spending their money, they're not spending their money on developing change leadership skills. They're still largely focused on sort of developing skills for the masses. So they spend a lot of money on business acumen. That's their number one priority. They spend a lot of money on strategic planning, leading innovation, talent management, which seem to me to map to things like general leadership training. And of all of the other things that they had listed in their top priorities for 2015, and there were about 20 other types of programs, there was only one that mapped to change leadership, and that was communication. And obviously, communication is important, but it's only a small part of leading change. And so, though chief learning officers are communicating to their HR leaders and to the executives in their organization that their development programs are tied to business strategy, in fact, they're not spending any money or very little money on this really important piece. And so what we decided to do was to help companies build these 7 very specific skills and to package them in such a way that they were teachable and learnable and repeatable. And so those are inspire, guide, align, network, translate, energize, and manage. And you notice that the graphic around these is a circle. That's intentional. It's to say that even though change tends to roll out along an implementation plan in a certain order, any of these skills could be required at any given time during the course of a major change initiative. And so just to put a...
Kimberly,
Yes.
I'm sorry, someone asked a question a while ago when you were talking about realizing value, and she asked if in the nonprofit world is realizing value. Does that translate into evaluating outcomes and impact of the work and services?
Yeah, so whatever it is that you're defining as your ultimate outcomes, so not the rollout of a program, right? That's an activity. But if it actually has to do with an improved health outcome, for instance, that's realization. If it has to do with I'm trying to think of some other non-health related examples, but if it has to do with an organization that helps people with retirement savings, going through the training programs to learn how to do it is implementation. Actually increasing the size of people's retirement account would be realization. And so, so the ultimate things that you are trying to accomplish with your stakeholders are realization. The things that you put in place along the way are implementation.
There's one more that's related to what you're discussing. What are some examples of a leadership skill that's not included in change management?
So a leadership skill that's not included in change management might be building a budget. A leadership skill that's not included might be doing the external market research necessary to understand what the strategic direction should be. Those are not necessarily the kinds of things that are required during change. It's the actual people engagement skills that we're focused on here. So all of those other kinds of things that they learn to do to run a line of business, for example. So if you think of like general manager training, there's all sorts of things included in general manager training that aren't necessarily directly related to the engagement of people. So I'm going to keep rolling here because I'm concerned that we're getting past our time. We only have an hour, and I want to make sure that we get through all 7. So to give you a quick overview of these, Inspire has to do with coaching leaders to tell a story about a future state in a very specific way. There's a formula around how to do that. Alignment has to do with working with senior leadership teams, sometimes who are not motivated at all to come to a common point of view around a change and to get them aligned. Facilitation has to do with surfacing solutions and building networks in the organization. Coaching has to do with the use of authority and influence and persuasion, helping people to do that on your behalf, because many times you can't reach the middle level manager audience that actually needs to do the translation. So it needs to be cascaded. That capability needs to be cascaded in the organization. Energize has to do with engaging the broader audience, the people who are actually going to change their behavior to make sure the results happen in the organization. And accountability, these have to do with the individuals and groups in the organization who actually need to do things to sustain the change over time, not just now. And then finally, guide is in the middle. That tends to be us, the people who really touch all of these other constituent groups and get ourselves positioned to influence across the entire spectrum of the organization. And the idea here is this requires a little bit of different thinking and skills on our parts to engage with these folks potentially differently than we are today. So if you haven't had a chance to take the assessment, now would be a good time to download the graphic. And we're going to jump into some quick examples. I'm going to share with you some 7 sort of micro stories. I actually use these examples in our programs. We use them in a much deeper way as case studies and scenarios to drive learning around the concepts, but just so that you can kind of get a flavor of what each of these skills is about, I share these with you. So Inspire is about clearly defining and articulating outcomes in a way that moves people to action. And the first person that you're probably going to work with on doing that is the person you're coaching. Oftentimes it's the sponsor of the change. So I want to give you an example. I was involved in implementing an ERP a couple of years ago at a company. It wasn't Merck. It was about 10 years ago. And a colleague and I were coaching leaders to talk to their organizations about what was to come. And 2 separate vice presidents got up and talked about the implementation of the ERP in 2 very different ways and got very different reactions from the crowd and very different outcomes on the initiative itself once they started implementing it. So I'm going to share this with you. And what I would ask you to do is just take a couple notes along the way about what you're hearing and what sounds different between the delivery of these 2 vice presidents in the very same auditorium. So imagine you're in an auditorium and the VP is on stage and there's about 100 people at many different organizational levels in the room. And he just had a blank background with 3 bullet points on the screen. He was doing this as a part of his quarterly review. And the third bullet was ERP upgrade. And here's what he said. As you know, our company's been having some problems. We can't track orders. Customers are angry. Products aren't delivered on time. We've got a lot of returns and tremendous inventory expense. And all of this overhead is impacting the cost of our products. Something finally has to be done. So, we've been struggling with this for a couple years, but upgrading isn't really something we want to do. It's something we have to do. It was a lot of hard work to do it last time, and we will need to rebuild a lot of the systems that we ourselves put in place. This time, we're going to focus on the upgrade of SNOP, inventory management, and the AR modules, along with a few other priority processes initially. Just like always, I'm counting on every one of you to get it done. Pat's going to get in touch with you in a few weeks to talk about the plan and the next steps. Thanks for your time today. And he left the stage. So take a minute and chat in to Abby and I, if you would. What did you hear? If you were sitting in the room, what would your reaction have been to the prospect of getting involved in this ERP implementation? Sounds like pain, Stefan says. Yes, it was pain, Stefan. Dry, burdensome. Thank you, Christine. Other thoughts? Reactive, yeah, doesn't sound very proactive. We've got a lot of problems. Good. What else? Focusing on the problem instead of a bright future. Absolutely. Not motivating. No, it sure isn't. So now let me share with you a different example. Oh, so Margaret says, talked about how, not what. Absolutely. And not why either, right, Margaret? So I'm going to share with you the example from a second vice president. And this is real. And here is what he decided to do based upon some input that the team gave him. So it's the same auditorium. It's a couple of days later, and he too started with a blank screen. And he began by saying, I'd like to introduce all of you to Narita. Narita is one of our customers. She's 4 years old and lives in Guatemala. She uses one of our products, which dramatically improves the quality of her life. Her family doesn't have a lot of money, and they have to sacrifice in order to purchase our products. They live in a remote village and have challenging lives. In fact, our products can only literally make it to her on the back of a donkey. So when our products are produced, we don't know how to plan for how much she needs. We think it takes 6 to 8 months to get there. Sometimes it's expired by the time it does, and it's costly. So we need to fix that. And I see a day when we can get Narita what she needs on a reliable schedule and at a price that's not a burden for her family. And let me be clear, this is going to be challenging. There is no doubt about it. But I think you all agree that this little girl and our other customers like her as well are worth our effort. And the quality of her life is in our hands. So I would appreciate everyone's support on this. Pat's going to get in touch with you in a few weeks and talk about the plan and the next steps. So what did you hear this time? What was different? So while you're chatting those in, just to rewind a little bit, as an example in the last story, Kate said, as an employee, it left her with the feeling that she did a poor job. And Colleen said, lacking high standards and vision. All right, so that was story number one. Michelle says this one is memorable. Margaret says this one's all about the future state. Colleen, much more personal and meaningful. Absolutely. Other thoughts? Focus on positive impact and on the beneficiary as a customer. That's a really important one, Bonnie. Employees we know are really starved for purpose these days, right? In a fast-paced techno world, people really are searching for purpose. And anytime we can tell a real story about a customer or the stakeholder who ultimately benefits from what they do, it's tremendously powerful. And, we have done this in companies. I have a company that makes car parts. I have another company that I work with that makes high-performance stainless steel components for a machine shop. These are not sexy products, right? But we are always able to make the connection with the customer. And what we know is that people are willing to do things for the customer that they're not willing to do for their bosses, and they're not even willing to do for each other. It's specific, it's visual. That's a really important one, Tess. It's visual. So we're not just putting a bunch of data up there, and it's inspiring. Absolutely. More effective. Yeah, so this one went a long way. People were literally, their eyes were tearing up in the audience as he was telling this story. Here's the thing that executives are always shocked to learn. And here's the data that's in the white paper I'm going to send you. 60% of employees at the front line can't read an income statement. And so despite the fact that executives love to tell people with data about what their plans and goals are for the future, nobody is motivated and moved to action by things like productivity, right? And a lot of them don't even really understand what those measures are. In addition, only about 4 in 10 employees know what their companies stand for. And so the idea behind telling stories is, taking advantage of how we know the human brain works. Instead of giving people data that can, be sort of piece by piece processed in the conscious mind, using techniques like neural coupling, where we are causing people to feel, causing their brains to light up in the exact same way that ours do when they tell the story, is really tapping into the part of their mind that can process millions of pieces of data simultaneously and actually creates an imprint on the brain. And that's what causes people to empathize and feel like it resonates with them and they understand. So Inspire is really about creating clarity around outcomes with your sponsor, making those gaps visceral, transforming data into things that are visible, and using that very specific story to get an emotional reaction to people that they're willing to commit to being a part of. Now, when you all answered this question, this is the feedback of your scores. If you're taking the assessment now, the answer. The question to answer here is, do you know how to advise senior leaders on the techniques to create and tell visceral, compelling stories about their business gaps? So this group, you can see, had a very wide variance in their score. So some people said 0. I don't know what this means. Never done it before, or never had the opportunity to do it. Some people say, absolutely, I'm all over it. I'm an expert. I do it all the time. I'm a 10, with the average score being a little over a 6. I pulled out from our database of folks that have taken this. I tried to really call out the more senior folks. And of those couple of hundred people, their average score is around just about an 8, 7.82. So I would say this group is on par with that. But again, there's more divergence in this group's scores. Even though the average is fairly close, there's more divergence among the scores. So alignment. Alignment is about working with a leadership team to get to a consistent view and making decisions and prioritizing. And I'm going to show you a really quick video here. I want you to grab your pen again if you would. Hopefully we can get this to launch. And here's what I want you to look for. I want you to pick out some specific behaviors that you see during the course of the video. This is a trailer for 12 Angry Men. 12 Angry Men is a movie from 1957 in which they are in their jurors' room, determining the fate of a young man who has been accused of capital murder. So in other words, if he's convicted, he's going to receive the death penalty. So it's a very high stakes decision, and they've been sequestered in the jury room. They've been in there a long time. It's hot and sweaty. It's high stakes. And what I'd like you to do is capture a few of the behaviors that you see occurring while they're in the jury room. And I'm going to launch this and turn up the sound.
Can't hear the sound, Kimberly.
Okay.
Still can't hear it.
Okay. That better?
No, not really.
So let's just let it run through, Abby. We've only got about 20 more seconds. All right. So even if you weren't able to hear the audio, can you share what you think you saw in terms of behaviors? There should still be a few things that you can pick out based upon observation, even if you couldn't hear. What do you think you saw? Peer pressure? Oh, it sounds like we have our video is still running here. There we go. What did you think you saw? Definitely peer pressure. Aggression, anger, fear, absolutely. What else? Emotion, good. Other thoughts?
Threats, Michelle said.
Threats, yes, there were some very obvious threats. Rage, one person staying with his values, right? Seemed very chaotic, absolutely. So, have any of you ever observed these kinds of behaviors on the part of your leadership teams? Hopefully not to the point of threats of violence, but oftentimes what we see is that at exactly the time that transformation is ramping up in the organization, the politics in the organization ramp up right along with it. And we tend to see some behaviors that we might not otherwise see. And so Align is really about helping people make their way through that conflict and that lack of alignment, because even though there's a ton of evidence that it costs organization dollars and cents, at least a couple of hours per week per person, billions of dollars in lost time, what we really care about from an initiative perspective is that it's causing us to not have alignment on our projects, which slows us down. Right, so everyone agrees that this is happening, but we're not able to seem to nail how to address the problem. Ultimately, and this was another great study from Bain a couple of years back. A company's value really has a lot to do with how it makes decisions, and companies that are really effective at making decisions and prioritizing have significantly higher shareholder returns than companies that are not good at those things. And so to the extent that we can be helpful in getting leadership teams aligned, navigating the political landscape ourselves, which begins with the ability to see it and understand what's happening, decoding intentional roadblocks, being a neutral resource, someone who's perceived as sort of riding above the political fray, who can be of service. And in fact, discerning if and where to even intervene in dysfunction. I think our tendencies many times as organization development professionals and coaches is we want to help teams fix all of the sources of their dysfunction. But actually, when it comes to helping teams get aligned, we're really only looking to solve a short list of priorities, the short list of things that they need to be able to do to be effective on this initiative, and to leave the scope of all the broader dysfunction, to another scope, right? To another set of issues that we can deal with at another time. And so as you scored yourself on this, compared to other senior folks, again, we have a pretty wide range of scores, ranging from, not really comfortable with this at all, or haven't done it, or haven't had the need to, yep, I'm scoring myself a 9, I'm comfortable, I know that I'm good at it. The senior database rates themselves, their bottom end is a little higher than yours, so the lowest that they rated themselves was a 3, a highest a 10. And so there is a bit of a gap here, so their average is around 8.17 and about 6.6 here. So if you are rating yourself on the graphic at home tonight, ask yourself the question, and you're going to shade in the red area on the graphic on this one. Am I comfortable navigating complex political agendas and leader and team dysfunction to help leaders make decisions, prioritize, and behave in ways that are consistent with their goals? Sorry, I know that's a couple-barreled question there, but so that you can kind of get the essence of what is it in a line that's important, and are you comfortable that you know how to do that? So the next skill set is around networking, developing the plans and network required for the successful implementation of an initiative. And just a really quick story for you here. One of the ways that I learned about networking was we were faced with a customer change in a plant that I worked with a client in many years ago, and they were bought by the Japanese, and the leadership team was subsequently fired and replaced completely, 100%, by a group of Japanese executives. And we were called down to the plant because we were having some quality problems. And so when we got there, we were placed in a very small conference room, and a diminutive Japanese young guy came in, and he turned over a blue egg crate, and he put it on the floor in front of us and left the room. And a couple minutes later, the plant manager came in and stepped up onto the egg crate and proceeded to read us the riot act in Japanese for about 15 minutes. To this day, none of us knows exactly what he said, but the long and the short of it was, if you don't get your quality problems resolved in the next 48 hours, you're going to lose your contract. And the contract was $30 million a year, and we had the contract for almost 30 years, and it was evergreen. So this was a massive loss of revenue at stake. And what we really did was to jump over all of the formalities that we would normally have had around project management and putting teams together, and literally got people in rooms and worked together on walls with butcher paper to figure out process issues. And within 48 hours, we had solutions in place to most of those, but it was very fast. And so the idea here is that picking the right people throughout the organization and moving perhaps far more quickly than you would normally think possible actually is possible. Most organizations are moving through Agile and other mechanisms to a much more rapid style of pull implementation. Lots of project management offices actually close within a couple of years, much to the dismay of the people who are running them and their project management peers. But it largely is because the organization feels that they're too slow and bureaucratic, that they're out of sync with the pace of the organization. So they're making projects smaller. Bigger projects fail more often. So they're making projects smaller, and they're pushing them further down in the organization with a little less air traffic control, sort of more lighter touch coordination, which means that our leaders need to rely on a much more nimble networked approach to execution, because now it's happening locally. Somebody isn't going to come from the enterprise or the corporate headquarters or the mothership or your main office somewhere from another corner of the world to come out and make the implementation happen. The headcount just isn't there, and it's too slow. The challenge is that, according to CEB, 70% of organizations say their leaders lack the flexibility to do that. They don't know how to really rapidly build, lead, and energize a network of people who can get this implementation work done locally and fulfill the work of their day jobs at the same time. So the key in network is we're speeding up team functioning. This is great for OD folks because we tend to find ourselves in the thick of this kind of thing, helping teams work more quickly and more effectively with one another. coaching those project team leaders, even if they haven't had much experience before in leading small, fast-moving teams, developing implementation change networks in the organization, and really making sure our enablers are in place. So are we looking at business processes, structure, decision-making, information technology, and knowledge management? Lots of initiatives come up with a really great solution, but because they don't have any enablers, they never hook themselves into the fabric of the organization, and they're not sustainable. So working with the teams is the place that we can make sure that those enablers are in place. Here again, we had a significant divergence of scores from 0 to 10 with an average about 6.69. The folks in the senior database start at a little bit higher score, but overall you can see the averages here are pretty close. So even though there's a broader range of scores, in general you're pretty close to the same capability level. And if you're rating yourself on the graphic, the question for you is, in the yellow section, to what extent have you establish these common elements of a pull system to support people who are doing the implementation work locally, right? So you're not able to send people out to help them to do it. Are you putting the mechanisms in place to actually support them in doing it themselves? So next up, the next skill set up is translate. And this is really making sure that as you start to move the change down into the middle of the organization, that middle managers, a colleague of mine calls this the layer of clay, have the capability to engage their people. They know what to say. They have the words. They know how to engage people as groups. Quick example here, and I wish I had more time to give you the deeper version of this story, but at one time during my career, I was a vice president of human resources for a division of about 7,000 people. And the phone rang in the middle of the night, and the caller said, "You need to get down here first thing in the morning." So I got on a 6 o'clock flight, and I walked into the manager's office. And on his desk were a ball cap and a set of keys and a badge that belonged to a gentleman by the name of John, who had been killed on a piece of equipment the night before. Everyone was heartbroken and crying. It was extremely emotional. And what made this even more tragic is that we had been working on safety there, behavior-based safety, for about 2 years. And we had very supportive sponsors, all the resources we could have asked for, and yet we didn't get to realization, right? Because realization is people going home to their loved ones at the end of the day, not safety statistics on a safety log. And so we sorted through it over the months afterwards. And what we really heard from the managers was, we could have done more to build the bridge between a far-off company initiative, organization initiative, and what it really means for us here individually, here on the floor as we work together as colleagues. And so, after that, we made a number of changes in how we thought about safety and how we engage people in safety. And I can tell you, as far as I know, there's never been another fatality in this organization. In fact, last year, I believe they won the State of North Carolina Star Award for their safety performance. So they really were able to crack the code around how to translate something that seems like it's just, a bureaucratic program into something that really is meaningful. So middle managers are the bridge between corporate priorities and personal interests. 84% of employees have experienced a shift in their business operations recently. 71%, and I think this actually seems low. I think people, we can probably never give them enough information, but they feel like they're not receiving enough information as their organizations go through change. And this next statistic, even though it's relatively low, I'm encouraged that it's at least pointed in the right direction. It's a third and growing, indicate that their managers' ability to have candid dialogue is the skill they think that's going to have the greatest impact on overall company performance. So the extent to which a people manager can be that bridge and make priorities real to folks that are working with them on a very individual basis is a really important skill set, and it tends to be one that companies don't focus on from a change perspective. Here's another one that I think is really helpful. When employees, and I think that this could just as easily say stakeholders, understand their role, 91% will move towards that. They'll work towards that end. But if they really don't understand their role and what you want them to do, that number plummets to 23%. That's a 68-point swing. So the value in having someone understand exactly what it is that you're asking them to do, it seems really obvious, but if you look through a lot of the documents and stories and other kinds of things that I work with companies on, it's shocking actually how infrequently the call to action, what are we moving from and what are we moving to, how that really isn't clear in a lot of cases. There's, a lot of corporate speak about a new direction, but not a lot of clarity on exactly from a behavioral perspective we're asking people to change. So Translate is about bridging understanding across the hierarchy, coaching people managers to coach, which obviously is right in our wheelhouse, right? Helping managers to coach their people more effectively, to lead through dialogue and questions rather than directives. Helping people understand the implications. Sort of in the traditional world of change management, this may have said personalize the WIFM, the what's in it for me. But there isn't always a WIFM. Though we try to design in ways that we make sure that we are building that motivation and that there is something there, sometimes there isn't, and folks are going to lose their jobs, or their jobs are going to change in ways that that they don't find to be very positive. And so helping people understand the implications and exactly what to do is helpful. And of course, localizing those priorities, as I mentioned, and coming up with interim solutions to help close the skill gap. Not all managers are capable of this, and so we've got to prop them up. We've got to give them the tools and aids that they need to be able to carry out these conversations, even though it's not something that they're comfortable with. So in Translate scores comparisons, this was actually our lowest score overall as a group. Again, still a range here pretty big from 0 to 9. Average was a 4.55. Range on the senior database was equally as large, but their average was quite a bit higher. So a quick question to you. In this area of Translate and helping middle-level managers be the bridge and translate priorities, can you chat in what are some of the biggest issues that you're encountering in this area? What are the challenges that you're facing? I'll just take a moment. We're on a delay. Thoughts on what led you to rate slightly lower in this area than in some others? Helping the middle level of the organization really translate priorities to folks. All right, so they're not just people managers, they run the business operations, so they're really busy. Yes, right. So integrating this kind of thing into their day-to-day work can be very challenging. Agreed. Language barriers, knowing how people talk about the issue. Agreed. Someone put 0 because no middle-level managers in their organization. So if you're in a not-for-profit, this is a place where you can think about, so who is it between your executive director that runs your agency and that small group of leaders perhaps, and the people who are in between them and the ultimate people that you're trying to touch, the ultimate people you're trying to get to change? Are there local thought leaders? They don't necessarily need to be an intermediary between you, but are there other people who are in this function who could play the role of translating and influencing the people you actually do want to change? That's one way to think about this if you're a nonprofit, that you may not have middle-level managers touching people. That's not how it works in your world. But is there someone else out there who is advocating for you, where there's a role that they're playing locally, perhaps, local chapters, various points of contact around the world, other people who can be carrying your message, and are you working with them to do that effectively? Allowing themselves to be vulnerable in conversations. That's a good one, Christine. Middle-level managers hate to communicate ambiguity. And so to the extent that we can work with them on some techniques to do that, to provide them with some FAQs, some scripts, also helping them explain what is going to happen when they don't know the answer and how they'll get it and when to expect it, gives people a chance to experience that indirect level of control, that even if they don't know the answer, they trust that the middle level manager is going to work on their behalf to get it. And Colleen says different levels of comfort, philosophy, skill with candid communications. Absolutely. All of these things play into that. And so, as I mentioned, working with managers on these very specific skill sets and giving them the skills just in time, even if I'm not talking about building large-scale training programs here. I'm talking about, in some cases, kind of propping them up and giving them just what they need, only what they need, just in time to be able to have some of these challenging conversations. So the next one is energize. And I'm looking at our time here, so I'm going to pick it up just a little bit. Getting past fear and negativity to adoption and motivation to change. In my past life, I was in outsourcing for many years, and outsourcing had a reputation in the 90s. If some of you remember that, we would kind of come in and we would lay a lot of people off, and we would change the processes, and it was a very difficult and painful experience for the people who work there. And so, we got an account, and it was actually what is now the Meadowlands Stadium here in New Jersey, highly unionized facility. Some of the unionized electricians there making $250,000, $300,000 a year, and so they felt vulnerable when we came in to take over the account. They were very concerned that there was going to be layoffs, that we would renegotiate the labor contracts. They would all make a lot less money, and so it was very tense. And so what they decided to do, because we did quite a poor job of getting them past their fear and negativity, one weekend the Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus came to town, and they decided that they were going to put cherry bombs in the commodes. They were going to steal things out of the supply cages. They were going to vandalize the facility. And they also decided that, and keep in mind, these are sort of, maintenance mechanic type guys in most cases, that it would be a good idea to get wheelbarrows full of elephant dung and fill the project manager's car with that. And so they were signaling to us the very high level of fear and negativity that they were experiencing by this really dysfunctional behavior. And so, for those of you who are Senghi fans, this is right out of the book, but we know that people are going to run up their ladder of inference. As a matter of fact, there are estimates that you can get up this ladder of inference as fast as 0.4 of a second, from observing and hearing someone talk about something to adding meaning, making assumptions, drawing conclusions, and ultimately deciding this is bad for me and I'm not going to do it. The good news is, knowing that people go through this thought process, there's a lot that we can do in terms of how we prepare information and how we prepare managers to share that information that can slow this process down and really get people to think more objectively about what's happening, as opposed to what we allow to happen at the arena and have people run up their ladder of inference in a totally unmanaged way and do damage and cause harm and do things that were not helpful. Negative thoughts do tend to come up and change frequently. In fact, most of us have a negativity dominance in our mental chatter. So the majority of most of our self-talk is negative. And we also have an absence of trust in the workplace. Most of our associates don't have a high level of trust in their managers. Many don't feel safe communicating with their leaders. But what we do know is that most of them know that trusting their boss or trusting that one other person they're working with, perhaps a peer, is really important. And so if you think about this from the perspective of implementation, if you look at most project plans, what's built into those is very minimal support for people. And when it is in there, lots of times it has to do with go talk to your boss or go talk to the next person up the ladder. I think also the implication of this for not-for-profits is you're implementing into a similar environment, right? There's a high level of skepticism. There's a high level, you're implementing in the same environment of negative chatter that the rest of us are. But perhaps in your case, it's not about trusting their boss or trusting their peers, but it may be about trusting the information itself. We're now living in the age of alternative facts, right? And so much information to go through that it's hard to actually make sense of it and cut through the noise. So I think there may also be a trust factor with you as well as you're trying to move people towards changing their behavior. So the scores here, again, a fairly wide gap on this one. This is our second lowest score area, 5.92 compared to 8.23. So similar question, what are some of the challenges that you are experiencing in helping individual employees, or in the case of not-for-profit, your stakeholders, actually making changes in their behavior? What are some of the things that you're encountering there? And as you're sharing those, some of the things that frequently come up here around mobilizing people to actually take action and do something different. We really need to get creative about how we engage people. Just giving them the information tends to be really insufficient anymore. And so one of the things that I advocate for is creating ways that people can experience what the future will be like. So games and scenarios and visceral experiences. And sometimes they're fun and sometimes they're sobering. But really the idea here is, what can you do to create a feeling in someone, a visceral experience that helps people experiment or experience a little piece of what the future is going to be like? Orchestrating more peer-to-peer support between citizen to citizen or employee to employee, as opposed to just sort of sending, contact our helpline or go talk to your manager. Orchestrating that peer-to-peer is really important. And facilitating success mechanisms. So what are some of the obstacles that we can remove to people making a change in their behavior?
Kimberly, you asked folks a question, but are you going to leave them time to respond to that?
Yes, sorry. I was just trying to fill the quiet time and keep moving while they were thinking, Abby.
Okay. I just think we need a little quiet time to think and be able to post their responses.
Okay. So what makes it challenging for you on this idea of energizing employees or stakeholders to change their behavior? Michelle says, being in a small team, I realize people have difficulties being open to share constructive feedback. Yep. You start to only mention good things, but no, this should be better because people seem to be concerned what the impact would be on the other person, right? So sort of preserving people's feelings. One of the things that we use are two different kinds of really simple scripts. One is about things went well today. And the other is, we had a setback today to get to that issue, Michelle, where people are reluctant to kind of bring up the negative. It also works the opposite way, which is where you have a group of people who are sort of cranking and moaning about a change, using a success script that acknowledges, hey, something actually good happened today, and this is what it was, and this is why we're going to repeat it because this is a result that we got. It's a different way of helping to shape people's dialogue to be open to more objective possibilities around what went well and what didn't go well. So that's a really good one. Thank you. No value proposition. Okay, so there just isn't anything good there to help the associate with, and that does, as much as we try to make it good for people, sometimes it just isn't. If you're an outsider, it might be lack of trust. Could be lack of trust if you're an outsider or an insider. I think if you've got a manager who's not very skilled in working with people and doesn't have much trust, that's an obstacle. But yes, for us in our roles as consultants and coaches, they may not really be willing to open up and make those changes. Yeah, influence of peers to stay in the negative mindset, absolutely. So really working with the manager to shift that dialogue is important. making sure I'm meeting with them where they are and are not where I want them to be. And sometimes we can do this directly, right? Where we can go out and have conversations with associates locally, but in other cases, you may be impacting a group that's so large or so dispersed that the only way that you can get to them is through their managers and other people, through cascading. And so part of this is about, yes, we want to be able to do it ourselves where we can, but also building skills in others. Having enough variance of appeal that it's understood at more concrete levels. Yeah, so I think that sort of gets back to the value proposition. Like they need to understand exactly what they're being asked to do and understand the implications. Risk averse. Yep, some cultures are, no matter what it is, they're really uncomfortable making any changes. Yep, similar to value proposition content. Strategy is still not clear, makes it difficult to motivate people to fundraise, do government work. Absolutely. It's really hard to get people on board when they don't know exactly what it is that you're asking them to do. And so, one of the keys in creating that compelling story is that it can help you overcome some of those gaps in details if people are really attracted to, to what that compelling story is, because it's bigger than them and it has that sense of purpose, so that while you're filling in some of those other details, like what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what you need to do, they've got that big why in their minds. So good. So there are lots of challenges in this space. So I appreciate you sharing some of those. So again, we talked about what to do to energize others, more creative engagement individually, getting people to work together as opposed to relying on hierarchy, and removing some of those obstacles for them. All right, this is the next to the last one, and then we're going to move on to debriefing some of our other scores. I worked in an organization one time where for about 2 years, the people in the field, it was a very complex account organization. Project managers in field locations were asking for their P&Ls. They had no idea how much money they were spending each month, whether they were actually making money with the customer account that they were supporting. And so it took us 6 or 8 months, but we redid all of the wiring in the organization to be able to create those reports for them so they could take accountability for profit and loss locally. And within 2 weeks, they didn't want it anymore. They refused to take accountability. They said, this is too hard. We never learned to do this in school. Our managers are now, oh, Abby, we're getting some background noise there. My manager never told me this would come with a sales target once I took responsibility for this. And so really the key message here is, just because someone has said that they want to do it, once they have it, does not necessarily mean that they'll take accountability for it. And so it's always a risk as we get into the later stages of the initiative that something that we thought was a foregone conclusion, that the business or the organization or the client or the stakeholder was going to really take this over and own it and make the necessary changes, we get to the end and we have a surprise. And here's part of the issue. The biggest way that most strategic initiatives use to create accountability is through the performance management process. In other words, putting accountability for the outcome in someone's objectives. The issue is, and this is quite a new study and a large study by Marcus Buckingham, only about 6% of people in organizations believe their current process for managing performance is worth the time. 6%. I mean, that's really dismal, right? But that's where we're hanging our hat in terms of the actual accountability for these changes. 58% of managers say the performance management process is weak, with North American companies being about 20% worse than the rest of the world in that rating. And this is my favorite statistic or data point, let's call it, anecdotally in the whole deck. When asked to rank where they a variety of tasks, I guess would be the best way to describe them. They said that they would actually rather suffer a bad hangover or get a credit card bill in the mail than face the prospect of sitting through a performance discussion with their boss. And so we can't rely on this anymore. Where we really need to move to is more of a prompt, regular conversations around accountability, which really is an organization coaching model, obviously. Us being better as coaches and OD and OE folks about negotiating required outcomes and helping people stay accountable for those themselves. So being really specific about those and not turning away from some of those difficult conversations. And again, using those enablers that we talked about back in network to really hook the results into the organization. The results here, you can see there's just huge variability in people's responses, and there's not much. You're actually a little higher here than the senior database, but the scores here aren't great. All right, only around 6. So most people aren't necessarily really comfortable. So if you're assessing yourself on the graphic, the question to you is, how comfortable are you negotiating specific accountability agreements with individuals and groups to make sure the business is able to achieve lasting results? And the last skill set, I'm going to touch on this one just very briefly. Guiding has to do with initiative leads, coaching leaders on commitments and interaction and applying the methodology. And I would suggest to you that many of us, where we have learned to work with difficult sponsors and initiative leads, really has been in working with some of our most challenging leaders early on in our careers. And so this happens to be one of my most challenging, Ed, his name is. And I won't get into all the details of our interactions, but the point here is that leaders oftentimes inadvertently put us in a very tactical role because they don't fully understand what our more strategic capabilities are. And so what we need to do is to be able to coach them around what's the best role for us to play as coaches and OD folks, and it may be a little different than what they have in mind. 55% of PMO leads, just as an example, say that they're seen as overhead. And so it makes you kind of wonder, so if that's the way leaders are viewing people who are driving important outcomes on their initiatives, is it possible that they see us as overhead, that they don't necessarily see us as playing a strategic role? And their lack of know-how is one of the top challenges in implementing initiatives. In fact, most project leads report that they don't have an effective project sponsor. And so that creates for us a huge opportunity as coaches. And in fact, most companies are now turning to internal and also external coaching to help assure a better quality of interactions between us as coaches and also managers and their people. More than 73% now of organizations using some type of coaching, and often many of them moving to certification, so they're sure that they're really getting a good quality approach. So Guide is really about positioning your role to get in place a powerful working agreement. Some people call this contracting. I prefer not to think of it as contracting. I think that contracting is very limiting. Using mutual feedback as a lever, moving from that role of being a doer to more of a strategic advisor, and a number of other skills. But this really is about getting yourself positioned among all of those stakeholders to really be effective. And your scores here were quite good, better than the senior folks in the database. They're the range from about 0 to 9, with the average being a little over 6, and that being fairly higher than what the other folks in the database reported. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes now to talk about professional net worth and change effectiveness and some of your organization profiles. We're not going to go into these deeply. There is in the assessment report that you received when you took your assessment, there's some explanation in there that you can go back and take a look at. But just to kind of give you an overview, really, organizations are building change capability based on two major things: the amount of turbulence that they have in their environment, so how challenging is it for us to get things done, and the level of results that they're expected to deliver. And so just as a for instance, if you're in an environment that has a pretty low expectation for results and a pretty low disruption in the business, changes in the business, you don't need to have a very high level of skills. You can have some people who are just sort of pair of hands resources in the organization to help do some basic communication and get things done. But the higher you move up on those other two axes, the more turbulence there is and the higher level results you need to get, the more sophisticated skill sets you need to have. Most of the organizations that I see are about here. They're about in change management, and they've got some people playing change manager roles or OD people doing change management for them, and they've got a toolkit. But others have really needed to move past that because the business required it. And so they have folks that are playing more of a business partner role and looking at broader capabilities and human risks and providing expertise and feedback to the business. Where most companies say they need to get to when they rate themselves is change leadership. And that's really the reason that I work in this niche, because most companies are saying we've built some capability and we've got some results from it, but what we recognize is we really need to start working with sponsors of change, with the business leaders on changing their behavior in order to be able to get the results we want. And a few companies, GE among them, have really gotten to change acceleration where they're super efficient at incorporating environment changes from outside the company and really making business decisions about those internally and moving forward very quickly. In terms of where this team placed themselves based upon the questions you answered, it kind of looks like this. So we had a couple people who said you were operating in that pair of hands capacity, which is good. You've got a basic level of skills, you're contributing to the business. We all need to play the role of a resource at one time or another, right? We need to just go get it done. There are about 5 folks who are in that change management space now where you're playing that role for the business. A handful who are working really more as business partners, a couple who have just sort of crossed that line into coach, and then 2 who are really in that trusted advisor space. Overall, you're about a 5.5 here. So you're for the most part working in this change execution space. And the highlighted area is really where I work with folks, right? Because folks up here need a whole different set of solutions from a business acumen perspective. Most folks are interested in getting from change management a step or 2 up the ladder, closer to change execution or change leadership. And that really is what the strategic engagement skills help people to do. When you have these skills, you're able to deliver a higher level of results, and you're able to get some personal recognition for that as well, which is really where professional net worth comes in. That's about your impact, how big is what you are able to do, either in terms of dollars or stakeholder outcomes. What's your level of influence? So how many people are you able to work with, and at what level of the organization to get things done? And income, not just dollars and cents, but other things. How are you able to arrange other things of value to you based upon what you know how to do? There are an infinite number of organizational scores that you could come up with, and I just kind of put them into 4 categories here based on what's your capability level, and what's the opportunity. If you're working at you've got low opportunity and you don't have a lot of capability, this is where you feel kind of stuck, right? The organization isn't really buying what you're selling, and it's tough for you to sell because you don't necessarily have the skills to do it. By contrast, you may be working in an organization where you've got a ton of capability, but they already feel like they've kind of got more than they need. They don't need any more. And so now you're in a place where it's tough for you to grow personally and professionally because the organization either doesn't believe it needs more, or based on the business requirements, they actually don't need more. Recognition is where there's a ton of opportunity for you, but you don't necessarily have the skill sets to deliver on that. So the company wants more and they want to buy more from you, but you're not able to fulfill that yet because you don't know how. And realization is where they need it and you've got it. And that's really the best of all worlds, because that's what drives outcome for the company, and that's what drives personal outcomes for you. So let me just wrap this up. I know we only have 4 or 5 minutes left, Abby, and we intended to have a little bit more time for questions. So I'm gonna summarize this just a bit. In a nutshell, you all have access and opportunity. You can bring visibility when realization is not accomplishing what it's expected to. You can show the business what the gaps are. You can help them focus on realization, and you can really look at their business initiatives and think about, where can I play here? What can I, as an OD person or a coach, really bring to this to help them realize better business value? So you have a very highly, sorry.
Kimberly, I think it would be important to leave time because we've gotten a lot of data here.
Yeah.
Just wondering if we can go and just leave a few minutes for, can we pause here and just get some questions?
Sure.
Would you mind?
Sure.
Okay, so there was one. Folks, if you have a question, type it in there. Michelle had a question a while ago about aligning. How can you specifically improve the skill of aligning? It seems this is best developed facing a lot of such solutions.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge around aligning is that oftentimes as practitioners, we make it way more complicated than it needs to be. In fact, I ask a very short list of questions to get leaders aligned. What you're really trying to identify are the big boulders. What are the things that conceptually they have to agree on to be able to move forward? Oftentimes, though, Michelle, what they will try to get you to focus on are all of the details, all of the things that can't happen that they're not willing to do. And so alignment is really about taking them up to the level of principles, to that next higher level of a short list of things that they can agree on to keep them out of the weeds, and not trying to ask 40 questions about what they believe in and what they think solutions are and all of those kinds of things. Oftentimes, the OE approach is to ask a lot of questions, and then it's really hard to bring them together around a couple key issues. So it's about asking fewer questions, getting them aligned around really the biggest issues conceptually that they're likely to stumble over.
Anyone else have a question that you want to put in the box? Actually, let's just unmute them.
Muted.
I can't do it. Anyone else have a question you want to put in the box there? Doesn't seem like they have questions, Kimberly. Hello? Kimberly?
Unmuted.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. In unmuting everyone else, I seem to have muted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, I was saying it doesn't seem like people have questions. I asked if they wanted to type in a question. Folks, if you're unmuted, if you want to just indicate that you have a question, otherwise we'll move to the very last piece.
So if you need resources to help you with some of these things, I'm going to send you an email probably tomorrow morning. There's a special offer for the Boston Facilitators Roundtable. I have a program coming up in April. It's an 8-week program, a couple of hours a week to assess your change leadership skills, help you with some of your most challenging issues on your major initiatives. There's lots of great materials, tons of done-for-you frameworks and tools, and the feedback back on this program has been really terrific, with folks saying that it helped them to get their next up level job, getting lots of years of experience in a really small amount of time, and really getting some insights that are helpful to their either their internal or their external practices. So I invite you to think about that. I work with lots of major clients, so I have great experiences and examples to share with you. And I think from there, Abby, that's it. We can close it out. If this resonated with folks, I encourage them to get involved in the upcoming Strategic Engagement Skills program. And I partner with lots of folks externally on delivering capability building workshops and assessments. And so if you've ever liked to partner on something, I'm certainly would enjoy doing that. So please keep in touch, and we can connect on LinkedIn or exchange contact information. But it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope everyone has a terrific night.
So Kimberly, thank you so much for delivering this workshop. Very, very interesting, compelling stuff. Folks, we're at time, so I'll ask you, Kimberly, I think you're sending out an evaluation, are you?
Yes, so an evaluation will go out right after this session by email, Abby.
All right, so we'll get the evaluation that way, and Kimberly is also sending some follow-up, the white paper and some follow-up information, so we'll hear from her in the next few days. Thank you again, Kimberly. Thanks, everyone, for participating.